Hi there, friends. Welcome to another episode of the No Small Stories podcast. This episode, it's just Shane and I, but we'll be having a conversation about my writing for my fictional podcast, The Adventures of Abernathy Franklin, and a couple of other projects that I'm working on. We have a great conversation. We visit a lot of different places in the multiverse. Do stay tuned, and I hope you enjoy. Well, welcome everyone to episode 3 of the No Small Stories podcast. This one's just going to be me and Shane having a conversation. We're going to take a turn and talk about my writing for a hot second.
All right.
And it's going to be a little bit weird because I'm used to kind of steering the episodes, but we're going to give you the wheel this time and we'll see how it goes.
Cool. Yeah, so much power.
With great power comes great responsibility.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. How did you get started with all this? What's your story?
Well, so what I'm writing right now is the fictional podcast, or I guess that's sort of like where I would like to focus my energy and attention is the Adventures of Abernathy Franklin, and that started. So I've actually had the name Frankie, which is one of the versions of Abernathy Franklin, in my head, and the name Abernathy Franklin in my head since like college. Like I can remember when it came to my head, this like character idea. I was making Thanksgiving, like a Friendsgiving dinner with my roommate at the time and some other friends, and it was just this kind of like little daydream that was in my head. And of course, you know, life takes you a lot of different places and you don't always necessarily follow your highest joy as much as you would like to. Even though that is obviously the goal, right?
Right.
But so sometime just before the pandemic started, like just before lockdown, a friend of mine from high school reached out of the blue. And I was always someone who I used to write a lot of poetry, especially in high school and middle school. And a friend reached out to me and wanted my address for like one of those like family update cards, not like a Christmas card, but like just a fan, you know, and asked me if I was still writing. And as silly as it seems now, I at the time was like, oh yeah, I used to like to write. Like I haven't been doing that. It was kind of a strange little moment.
Yeah, it comes and goes. It's
it
it's a
does,
weird
but I
passion.
kind of think that, I think the universe was kind of nudging me a little bit, like, hey, get back into that. That's part of something that you really enjoy doing. You're supposed to be doing that. So I joined this website called Vocal, where you can they have like writing contests, or at least at the time they were having writing contests, and they would have certain prompts. And I was writing these short stories for these writing contests, and they sort of all kept coming out Abernathy Franklin stories. It was like just it just sort of happened that way. And I kept writing these little stories, and I thought, I'll just put it out as a podcast. We'll just see how it goes. And so that's kind of how it started, but now it's kind of just expanded into like I really just enjoy the characters. I enjoy seeing the stories that come into my mind, and sort of it's kind of like I think all writing to some extent is a little bit of sort of, channeling of your higher self, that there's stories that are, stories that want to be written, stories that want to be told, that like you're to some degree a little bit the vessel through which those stories are able to express, right? It's sort of a co-creative situation. And so it's been really interesting for me to see the characters that kind of come about and how they develop, and kind of have like the little, I don't know if you ever experienced this in your writing, but kind of like aha moments of oh, that's who this character is, or this is what this little caveat is. It's an exciting thing when you have that happen.
That's something I've been wanting to experiment with for a while, just because I've always written poetry. I always felt I don't know. I always feel intimidated writing a story and being able to. I guess the biggest thing is like plot for me. I'm like just like, how can I create something that happens that like people are excited with, and that's keeps people following. Like I feel like I'm great at characters because poetry is it's like fleshing out like emotions and all that stuff. So like character studies are like, that's fine. Like that's fair enough. That I could describe a character. I could maybe even describe a character's history, but to make them do stuff was always was always tough for me.
See, I think that's I have a little bit of that myself, but that's what
Mm-hmm.
I sort of the way that I've been writing has been a very sort of I'm very fluid. I don't have a lot of
Mm-hmm.
rules necessarily, right? Like
Right.
the whole idea of what I'm going into is like, everything. So, and it's something that like Frankie says, one of the versions of Abernathy, like Frankie's like, I like to think of Frankie as kind of being the highest version of Abernathy Franklin. She's, the one that's always the most calm, the one that's always not concerned about what's going on. Everything's a game,
Mm-hmm.
everything's fun, and but she always says everything that you can think of exists somewhere in some
Right.
dimension, right? And so that I think I really lean into that in the sense of the story being able to be fluid and not
Yeah.
necessarily needing a lot of structure rules, and not being super concerned about things like the sort of classic formulaic things, like we did talk about a little bit on the last podcast with Sean, the story arc structures that are kind of
Mm-hmm.
what are expected in our human creation of storytelling since the Epic of Gilgamesh essentially.
Right. Yeah.
So I do like being a little bit more I don't know, loosey goosey with it. So and I again though I started from a place of poetry too, so maybe that's a little where it comes from.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of writers too. I'm trying to read more books on writing. Whereas before I always felt like I was like I always felt like really lame like for doing that. And I don't have to read a book on writing if I'm an actual writer, or if I have any skill in it. Like I always put myself down about it. But the more I try to dig into the craft and really figure it out and take advice from writers who have done the same thing, it's super helpful. But they always say it's about an unraveling, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I guess if I can, if I'm coming from a place of poetry to I don't know, look at it as at least start off with like a stream of consciousness where it's just like, okay, what happens if this happens, and then I just take it from there, and then it's just words on the page to start with is is good enough for anybody. So
It is, yeah. I think for me, it is everything that I do is very stream of consciousness, partly because I think a lot of what I write just comes from like general daydreaming. Like I think
yeah.
a lot of my creativity is in that realm of just sort of like the daydreaming escapism, kind of like get out of my current, reality that may not look exactly how I want it to. So like
Hmm.
if this, if I could have anything that I could have or experience, what would it look like? And a lot of things like that. A lot of my stories come from that. I think a lot of my characters come from that. But it is an interesting, the idea of letting things unravel. I do think that's interesting. I do think that's fun because a lot of what I write, like it's starting to make a little more sense to me
Hmm.
in terms of okay, why have I always been interested in certain things? Things like anything in like the occult, esoteric sort of realms. I'm that sort of a contrarian by nature, and anything that I wasn't supposed to be interested in or look at was like I'm super fascinated by it. Like, why am I not supposed to look at it? I want to know more. So, but it's interesting because a lot of those things, and in the realm of like the paranormal and these different concepts, or even just like quantum physics, because I'm a big fan of like quantum physics concepts and theories, and it's it's interesting because since I've started writing, it's like okay, I've been able to incorporate all these ideas and these interests and these fascinations that I have into the story arcs, into what the characters believe, and the different sort of versions of Abernathy, like what she experiences in her reality and in her particular slice of whatever multidimensional space she's in.
Hmm.
It's I don't know, it's interesting. It's a fun little unraveling of like, oh, that's why I like these things, because look at how I can fit it into my story you
Right.
know
Yeah. Yeah. I was about to ask, like, is there, if you could boil down, yeah, Abernathy to like a locus of like things that you're interested in. You just kind of described a little bit, but is there, when you start to realize that these things are starting to be like connected, it's like, oh, this makes sense, and this feels familiar almost.
mm-hmm.
like when was it, or what was it about the character that whether it's her age or whether it's her background, where you just kind of started to realize like, oh, this is why these are all like these go together now. Like it's not just kind of one off. Like this is a story that goes with itself.
Honestly, the more that I've been writing, and I haven't, you know, I'm not so far in terms of like putting out episodes of the podcast, but I have a lot of ideas of like, this is an episode and this is an episode and this is
Yep.
a story kind of thing that I just have to, again, donate to our Patreon so that we can both have the time to sit down and write and spend more time with these things because they're going to be great entertainment for everyone.
Right.
But I've been noticing and I've recognized, I don't know, I think I might have been maybe sort of midway into the episodes that I have currently where I went, okay, these are different versions of me. These are
Mm-hmm.
versions of myself that I either have been or would like to be, right?
Right.
These are different perceptions I have of myself. These are different, whether it's something that, like, so one of them, one of the newer Abernathy Franklin, she's kind of new to this interdimensional travel and popping in and out of different dimensions. And Frankie calls her Nikki. And she's very much kind of a version of me that's still attached to the kind of survival mode, what is appropriate in human behavior, what is appropriate to a social situation, the sort of the worries or concerns that pop up. So like I'm writing an episode right now where Frankie's just like they're visiting 13,000 years ago human
Mm-hmm.
civilization, and Frankie picks up some berries and just starts eating them that are just like hanging out, and Nikki is like, what are you doing? Those could be poisonous. You could die. And Frankie's like, well, I don't worry about those things, so those things don't happen to me. Like she's just so completely unconcerned. And it's like it's a very interesting juxtaposition for me to be like, here's this version of kind of how I see myself and the sort of things I'm stuck in. Here's who I'd like to be. The person who is just supremely unconcerned with everything and just enjoying everything that's available because it is available. So it has been fun in that sense. It is a little bit of, and I think that's again something we've talked about with poetry being sort of self-reflective. It is a little bit of a self-exploration of, who have I been in terms of how I've perceived myself? Who
Mm-hmm.
have I been in terms of how, different versions of me perceive myself? When you're younger, you think of yourself a certain way, and in different, circumstances in your life, you see yourself a different way. So it has been a little bit of a self exploration in that sense, and it's I don't know, it's fun when it's something that is entertaining to me. It's a lot more, fun to
Right.
look at it as an entertainment source rather than kind of like the talk therapy, what's wrong with me sort of element.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. It's still an exploration, but a bit more enjoyable
A little on
most
the
days.
more on the fun side. And I'm like, you know
Yeah.
what? I think this works for me a little bit better.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that reminds me kind of when we were talking about Sean with the suspension of belief, because I'm similar that way when I critique my own writing sometimes, because I'm just like, especially when it comes to stories, I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense. Or like, maybe the reader would be confused by that, or maybe that sounds like, you know, dumb and doesn't go with, but it reminds me so much of my son, because we watch movies all the time, and he's 10 now, and so granted he's seen a bunch of movies, from obviously PG all the way to PG-13 now, just because I'm like I was watching the same
Mm-hmm.
sort of stuff. But he sometimes gets in the mood where when he's watching a movie and something happens either randomly or the character does something like just outlandish, or like I'm just trying to think of a good example. But anyway, he's just like, why would they do that? That's so stupid. Just like that, like just like the horror movie like scenario, right? With the
Yeah.
girl like goes
Why are
into
you
like
running
abandoned.
upstairs instead of out
Yeah,
the front door?
yeah. Why would you do that?
Yeah.
And I'm just like, buddy, you just have to like, it's part of the movie. Like, just you're in this world, and this is what happens in this world. And
You just
that's
have to
kind of
agree
that.
with the rules of what the environment that's being created.
Exactly. And if there are no rules in that world, then you have to accept that too. And but it's the world that, is created, and, the reader accepts those things. And, if they don't like it, they don't like it. But I'm trying to be less concerned with that, at least when it comes to writing stories, because for me, writing poetry, I've always like, for me, it's been such a help and like a therapy for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I almost have larger aspirations for it, for when other people read it. That
Well,
maybe I should tone down a little bit, maybe when I write stories where it's like, well, this doesn't have to like save somebody's life. Like this is just, you know,
but you
nice.
don't know that, the thing is when you're truest to yourself and your own creativity, that is when whatever you express is what someone can connect to more deeply. And I think,
Right.
it's like you don't have to know who it's going to reach or how it's going to affect them. You just have to be truest to yourself, and whoever needs it is going to find it,
Right.
And I'm definitely of the amuse thyself first sort of
Hmm.
realm. As long as I'm enjoying it, that's really what is important,
Right.
because because if you enjoy what you're doing, it's going to show, right?
Yeah.
It's going to come through in what you create. And I always kind of think too of I think it was Eddie Izzard, the comedian, who
Hmm.
said in an interview one time something about expect the audience to come up to you. Don't talk down to your audience. Don't tone yourself down to meet them. Expect them to come up to you, and they
Right.
will, you know?
Yeah.
And I do think that's true. I think your audience will, at least the audience that's meant for you, right? That's
Yeah.
meant for the most expansive version of whatever it is you have to offer. They're the ones that are meant for you are the ones that are going to love it and will find it. And the ones that don't love it, they just weren't meant for it. And that's okay.
Right. And that's just that won't be your audience, and not everybody's your audience, and not everybody can be. So
And that's perfectly all right, because
that's
there's,
perfectly okay.
again, there's many, many dimensions that
Yeah.
Abernathy is in. And so she's not concerned. She'll find the right one to be in. She's not concerned about it.
Yeah.
It's totally fine.
As you're talking about the different dimensions, did you have any specific inspirations that you can kind of point to? Like, for example, like I'm reading Sybil. Um,
Okay.
I'm rereading it again for the first time, trying to finish it. But that is, it's a story, but it's based on a study of a woman in like the 50s who had like it's the first psychoanalysis
Right.
of
Of like
somebody who was
the
like
multiple
16.
personalities, or I don't
Yeah.
know that that's what they call it anymore, but
Yeah,
that's how
yeah. So like
society
16
knows it.
personalities is what she was documented as having, and it's just a cool story. But I'm just wondering if you had any things like that that sort of pushed you towards, whether it was the occult, whether it was, any.
There's a lot of it that comes together. I mean, so like I have an episode where Frankie goes out and meets Bigfoot, and it
Mm-hmm,
turns out there is a version of Bigfoot that is sentient enough to communicate in speech, you
mm-hmm,
know, and I've always loved like paranormal, and that, like, I love cryptid stories. I have like even in one of my early episodes, one of the versions of Abby is reading The Adventures in Cryptozoology, which is a book that I have that I love, that is, again, sort of explorations of anything in the realm, I think, of weird, or anything outside of the mainstream, really. Anything that I was ever told that, like, that's crazy, that's weird, that's wrong, it
mm-hmm.
was that I'm immediately attracted to it.
Right.
So, there's a lot of different things. Like, I know um when I was first starting to write these little short stories, I was really heavily watching Haleigh, which is a
Yeah.
paranormal documentary. This group of friends who goes sort of in search of what they think is going to be a goblin's case that they're called to, and it's this really interesting journey they go on in this like paranormal investigation they do, where it becomes something completely different than what they anticipated,
Hmm.
at which is, isn't that just how life goes? Everything is,
Right.
whatever you think something's going to be, it always turns into something completely different.
Yeah.
And so, there's a lot of different things for me. I definitely love the paranormal. Like, I have, so one of the episodes that I have, one of the recent episodes, there's a version of Abernathy Franklin that actually transitioned to male at a young age, in some dimension that it's not really, again, kind of fully explained. I like to be a bit loose with details too, to, like, I don't know, give people room to accept the concept and not necessarily require a really solid sort of detailed description. But
Mm-hmm.
essentially, this is a version of Abernathy, goes by Fabian. Fabian transitioned as a like I think 16-year-old, if I remember how I wrote it correctly. I should
Mhm.
remember my own stories. But I like to think the characters come to me a little bit, so I don't always
Yeah.
you don't always know. But Fabian's boyfriend is Brody, and they go ghost hunting together. And so there's a version of Abby that goes by Natty, who like pops into their French villa on occasion just to sleep one off because she's been partying in her like favorite version of France. And she sleeps one off at their apartment and wakes up to go ghost hunting with them. And they go, they have this like encounter with a ghost where they're able to have this conversation with this ghost. And it's kind of so again, like again, the paranormal is something that's so fun for me and I enjoy, as hokey as a lot of it is, the ghost hunting stuff that you see,
Mhm.
and really for me, I think the biggest thing is just the exploration of human consciousness, the exploration of what is truly possible and available to us as humans. Like that is my biggest fascination, the idea of there's so much available, there's so much more possible in life than what we have been conditioned to believe, and again, my fascination with like quantum physics is like quantum physics is actually starting to, they've got their own like multidimensional string theories and all this that
Mhm.
absolutely lines up with the idea that, yeah, there's a lot more possible out there than this, very sort of limited understanding of existence that we have had for a very long time. And so that's I think that's my biggest thing, is just exploring the expansive ideas and
Mhm.
the things that maybe push the boundaries a little bit of what we've always understood and experienced about our, human existence and what is reality. That's kind of the
Yeah.
big question that I like to explore. Like, and again, I go back to Frankie. Another thing she says: all roads lead to El Dorado, and all truths are true. So
Mhm.
whatever it is that you believe in, whatever reality is that you think is reality, well, that's what your reality is, because
Right.
that's
Whatever
your
it is.
view.
Yeah. Yeah. Were you a fan of Ray Bradbury or Hitchhiker's Guide to the
Oh, I
Galaxy?
do love Hitchhiker's Guide. Hitchhiker's Guide is definitely one that I think I just re-listened to all three of those, the first three books in the series anyway, a couple months ago. I love, again, sort of the idea of like people get kind of stuck in the, I love the whole, they have the big experiment to find the answers to the universe and
Mhm.
everything, and the answer is 42, and
Right.
it's
Yeah.
like, which means nothing. And
Yeah.
it's just I love that, the sort of outrageousness of like, we take life and existence so seriously and we think there's all these like ultimate answers or these ultimate truths, and really it's like, no, reality and life and your existence has only the meaning that you give it.
Mhm.
Like, life is meaningless ultimately, but
Right.
that's not a bad thing unless you say that it is. Like, life has the meaning that you attach to it,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, meaning itself is, it's a construct. It's like otherwise it's just life or the absence of it, and that's the only.
Right. It's so that is I think a big thing that I explore. And like, so another like another series I'm writing, and I had a few short episodes that I kind of inserted into like the podcast, like the fictional podcast, is my Straight from Death series, where Death, the Grim Reaper, is telling about her favorite soul collections.
Mhm.
And the stories themselves of like, the what we would consider, I would think, it's maybe a little on the darker side. Like one of the first ones is has to do with like a cult. It's like a sort of thwarted love story that becomes this
Mhm.
like cult situation. And um essentially the stories are a bit tragic, a bit dark, a bit, at the outset they look upsetting,
Mhm.
but then at the end of it, when Death comes to collect these characters, they have their life review and they look at it and recognize how beautiful every part of it that they lived was, what the value was, and everything that they experienced. That, just because something might have been painful or you perceived it a certain way doesn't mean that that's how it was, doesn't mean that your existence was somehow less than by any means, and kind of the overarching theme of that is like, every experience is valuable, every life is valuable, everything that you live is of value to the expansion of just the consciousness that we all are, and there's no reason to sort of lament the way that your life went or be sad for certain events, because it is all valuable. Like there
Mhm.
is something beautiful that you can find in everything, you know. And that's, it's again, it's part of the self journey that I'm on,
Right.
and I think a lot of us as writers, that's a lot of, you have a lot of catharsis in your writing. Like this is how I want to perceive reality in the
Mhm.
world. How can I create that? Well, I have to create this, fictional scenario in order to experience it for myself to some degree. And, it's got to externalize itself in this reality somehow. I don't know the how bit yet, but that's okay.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Yeah, I think on my poetry, I think I'm just starting to get out of that phase. But before it was just like a lot of backlog. It's like I've got a lot of feelings, emotions,
Mm-hmm.
trauma, whatever that I'm like, I gotta feel and like figure out, what the fuck is going on. And then
The things you have to work through, like,
yeah, you got to work through it. And now, I'm maybe starting to get to that place where it's like, okay, now I can build the world that I want to, or now I can write about the world that I would like. And so it's definitely different. Yeah, I've always wondered about that at the end of life, because they say, is it DHT? That's the chemical that like this big
DMT.
DMT. That's just
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
dumped in your brain, like right that like during the death rattle, the few like last seconds where it's like I just wonder what those flashes of
I
memory are like.
So it's so funny you say that. I have also been, so like there's actually a study that they've been there that had been done a number of years ago, that I watched like a YouTube video on. Graham Hancock, who writes about, so he's a big inspiration for me. He's an investigative journalist, and he looks a lot more into like archaeology and sort of human history, and that's
Mhm.
where I am with this like 13,000 years ago civilization. So he has his work is based in the theory that there was a advanced human civilization 13,000 years ago that was lost to humanity, to history, because of what they are now discovering is true, a global calamity, a global, essentially the earth was hit with this comet debris that caused like
Mhm.
a snap that was a instant sort of winter, and like the flood myths that you hear about in different cultures and different religions
Mhm.
actually did happen on the planet. There was like massive flood events. These comet pieces hit the ice caps and melted all this water, and there's so many pieces of land, like huge swaths of land that are now underwater in the ocean that, archaeology doesn't really explore, but that there could
Mhm.
be evidence of human civilizations that were far more advanced than what we believe in our current, not to
Right.
sound like ancient aliens, but, mainstream science or mainstream archaeology. But so that's something that I am exploring too, but it's sorry, I lost my train of thought just a little bit. But it's one of those things that DMT, there it is, Graham Hancock. So there's another study that they did where they were actually giving people DMT intravenously, like to kind of get them to record their experiences.
Mhm.
And the the really interesting thing was that people would come back with, come out of the high or whatever you call it, because your body does
Mhm.
create DMT on its own, and
Yep.
they say that like DMT is a big factor in like your dream state and the
Yep.
things that happen in your dream state. But what was interesting was that these people who had these DMT experiences had similar descriptions of
Hmm.
sort of the experiences that they had. And like one of the things that Graham Hancock writes about too is um, the experiences that like shamans have, like you're looking at cave paintings, cave drawings all over
Mhm.
the world, and the experiences that shamans have, and how there's a parallel in the imagery of cave paintings of like ancient people and the things that are experienced by people who are shamans, who are going into like altered states of consciousness, whether it's
Mhm.
through plant medicine or whatever they do. So that's an interesting thing to me too, like the idea that okay, maybe there's this other layer to reality that
Mhm.
we don't experience or see regularly, but when you have that like high dosage of a chemical kick, whether it's DMT or a plant medicine, like suddenly sort of able to cut through the ego filter a little bit and see this kind of other layer that there is to existence that we just don't pay attention to usually, right?
Right.
And so
Well,
like
we're really good at like at negating or dismissing like the common factor between all
mhm,
humans, right? We're super easy, like it's easy to get in a fight. It's easy to like
yes.
see all the differences and stuff. But I listen to Sam Harris sometimes, and he's talked about psychedelics. He's talked about some of the experiences that he's had when he's on them, and like one was like one of the first times that he took it, and it almost feels like telepathy in a way, or it's like you're
Yeah.
able to connect with the person around you or next to you, like without speaking, and it feels, yeah, there's like this extra higher layer where it's like you don't have to communicate in a normal way. You're having the same experience. It's, I don't know, it's wild. So
I see, and that's the thing that, like, again, the idea of human consciousness, the interconnectivity of all of us, like, so and that's again more of that kind of like in the occult, esoteric, paranormal realm is where I was kind of introduced to it. But then I get interested in science and quantum physics
mhm.
and these studies like what Graham Hancock does, or these studies of people who do have very similar experiences, like on psychedelics or in various altered states of consciousness, however that happens. And that's something that I really love exploring in my writing, and the idea of a multiverse of parallel realities, of
Mhm.
anything that you could think of, anything that you might want in life already exists somewhere. You just have to figure out how to see it, sort of. You have to figure out
Mhm.
how do you cut through the subconscious programming that we've all been taught, or the conditioning that we have that we've picked up from other humans in our life, and to really start to see, okay, well, where is the reality that I want to experience,
Right.
and how do I allow myself to see that, and I love that. That's something that is definitely very fascinating to me, and especially like just that interconnectivity, like you were saying, having similar experiences, like, so I have two sisters, and my younger sister who lives nearby, we hang, like, it happens all the time, and it's so fun for me that where we kind of have like I might not be able to find a word or a name or something I'm
Mhm.
thinking of, but like she knows what it is right away, right? Or like we will start singing the same song at the same time, kind of thing. Like there's a lot of those little like where we sync up, right? And
Yeah.
and obviously part of it is, the familial thing, and that we've just like spent so much time together, like we've lived together a number of different times throughout life, and so there is that element of it, but it's something that's fun for me now, thinking of it in terms of that interconnectivity of human consciousness, that you can have those. I don't know if psychic's necessarily
Yeah. Right.
the terminology for it, but those things that happen where you just connect up with someone,
Yeah.
and you do have, you're having the same thought, or you're having the same experience, or it's kind of that idea too of you think about someone that maybe you haven't talked to in a while, and then they call you or they text you,
Yeah.
and it's like, oh, I was just thinking about you, so like just exploring that sort of, what are the powers of the human mind to really create circumstances, or to have a shared experience that
Mhm.
we don't usually explore, because we are so very, entrenched in kind of purging the old traumas, and getting through day-to-day existence, and all those sort of like the base level survival mode things that we get caught up in,
Yeah.
so that's something that I do definitely also enjoy exploring in my writing, if I, which is why I really love, Frankie, that the idea that, like, well, she just goes and does whatever she wants, and look at all these crazy things she experiences, and these different slices of reality she gets to see, and she gets to visit different planets, and she just knows so much about the cosmos, and it's, like she's kind of tapped in and tuned in, and turned on in some way that she's able to just know things, and
Right.
it's not, she doesn't look at it as like a psychic power or ability. It's, again, it's all a game, it's all fun, it's all something to experience.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's why we enjoy writing so much anyway, as creators, but just the, I don't know, the role that language has on that just base and broad communication between everything. it's awesome that one word can make all the difference, one association, one degree, like it just what that means to a person. So
Yeah, communication is key, isn't it? And that's kind of that's such a big part of writing in general, being able to communicate. And I think, poetry is a really good place to tap into that, communicating not just imagery to
mhm,
someone, but sensory emotions or a
yeah,
certain kind of energy, right? Like
yeah,
being able to express an energy and not just the kind of like the outer external sensory experiences that we're used to.
right, yeah, yeah. Well, especially when it comes to for me, I always think of poetry, when it comes to explaining like wrongs or injustices or you know prejudices in that way, where it's like, or biases, anything. It's like a person can see that it's wrong and a person can say that it's wrong, and all those things, but if you're still separated in the sense of like you have never felt it and you can't feel what it is to have that be done to you, then you're still you're just there's no skin in the game for you. You don't
Mm-hmm.
understand what it means to have without, or anything like that. So to make
So
somebody feel that is, I don't know, is incredible to me.
it is. So there's another episode that I have of Abernathy Franklin where they visit a soul rehab center for souls that have incarnated as like the big baddies of humanity,
Okay.
essentially. Right. So like Hitler is there. And like, so Frankie and Nikki go sit at a table with Richard Chase and Jeffrey Dahmer and
Okay.
Albert, like these. So like that's another thing that is a fascination for me. I love true crime and like serial killer stories and things like
Yeah.
that's been something that I've consumed a lot of in my, the entertainment that I no, entertainment's maybe not the right word, but that, that's a big thing for me is true crime, something that I've really loved. And so
Mm,
they're visiting this rehab center where souls go to recuperate after having absorbed all this hate from humanity because of the character they played on Earth when they incarnated as a human,
mhm.
essentially. So like playing with that idea of, human existence is a game. We choose as souls to come into this existence and be this person and experience sort of this, avatar, I guess you would say.
Yeah.
And so it's another one of those. So Jeffrey Dahmer actually in a former life was a nun who was
Mhm.
vegan and brought veganism to the village that he was in that incarnation. And so it's like, okay, well, to experience yourself from a different perspective, you have to
Right.
experience yourself from a complete, opposite end of the spectrum. And he was a cannibalistic murderer, so
Yeah.
it's kind of that idea of, again, the self exploration, having to see yourself from all the different perspectives that you possibly can. And so, yeah, that's another idea I like to play with, the kind of, we choose the people that we are, and
Yeah.
and we are, I don't know, I guess that we live on purpose,
Yeah. Right.
as much as sometimes we feel like things happen to us, or there are those traumas and things that you have to purge. It's like, but no, we chose to be here. We wanted to be here. let's
Right.
let's live like we want to be here.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's and I'm not uh an authority or a follower, or of anything of Hinduism, but just what I know of reincarnation, right? It's essentially like completing the cycle, right? Completing
Mm-hmm.
the cycle of life experiences, right? And you've had one, but that's a very small, tiny part of the whole existence, and you have to keep on cycling back until like you get through
And
all of it, and then you're complete, right?
right, until you learn all the lessons that you intended to learn. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's something that I'm also interested in. I think there's some of that I incorporate. Those kind of Eastern religions, the spiritual view of existence, and kind of a soul's journey. It's, this one lifetime that you're in isn't the only sort of opportunity to experience humanity that you have, right?
Yeah.
And may not be the only one that you've ever done. Like this might not be your only ride. You may have been in this rodeo a couple of times before, even if you don't remember it. And you know kind of trying to look at, I feel like I'm in a space like that in my life in general, trying to look at the things I have experienced and that I do experience and ask myself, how was that something that was meant to be of help to me, be of benefit to me? As much as you
Right.
might have those things where you have to sort of like, you have to go through things where you have to forgive people or
Hmm.
circumstances or forgive yourself for certain things. And that's it's very recently a space that I've been in where I've been like, well, is there really anything to forgive if this was something that was meant to be a learning experience?
Right.
It wasn't something done to me. It's not a mistake I made. It was an intentional learning experience. It had value. Is there really anything to be forgiven if nothing was truly done that wasn't intentional on a level that maybe I don't understand?
Right. Yeah.
Which I know is kind of a maybe a bigger, broader idea than most people are ready to absorb or
Well,
speculate on.
I think more people would be better off if they embrace some of those ideas because we are slow learners otherwise, and especially if we give everything a specific meaning, it's like we're not going to be able to progress in any way that's going to matter
Mm-hmm.
to us at least enough time in this reality in this life to to make it different. My son was introduced to the apple in the box theory,
I don't know if I know this one.
and he was kind of fascinated by it for a little bit. So he I'm not exactly sure where it came from or if there's a specific, kind of like the train situation theory, right? I don't know. I don't know if philosopher they came up with it, but it's, the conundrum, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the apple in the box, as best as I can explain, and I think there's a YouTube video on it too that probably does a little bit better. But it's basically you put this apple in this box, and this box is self-contained, like it's completely sealed, and you leave this box alone for infinity, right? For years, millions, trillions, eons, right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so eventually, within this box, the apple will break down and it will break down to the point of atoms and nuclear energy and fission and fusion and all those things.
Right.
And it'll go through all the iterations that it possibly can, all the different possibilities that those atoms that are already in that box that could possibly produce within that time. And it'll keep on going through all the iterations that are possible until it finally gets back to the apple. Because eventually it'll go through all the
Right.
possibilities to get back to the apple again. And it'll keep on doing that for as long as it's, contained in that box. And so if you think of the box as the universe, you can start to wonder, it's like, okay, how many iterations of myself have there already been there? So it's like it's a similar to the different dimensions. It's like I think of this as my first life as, Shane and, poet and doing all this stuff,
Right.
right? But if universe is infinite and if universe has been recycling and redoing itself forever, then this could be my, 9 billionth time is this, trying to do the
And you don't
same thing,
right, you don't know. You're just cycling through, and am I doing better this time than I did the
Yeah,
last, 8 billion times?
right.
Uh, but I think, so that's what I thought of immediately is Schrodinger's cat, which is a quantum physics thought experiment that I actually write about in an episode.
Okay.
Erwin Schrodinger was a quantum physicist, and the thought experiment was you put a cat in a box with an isotope that like breaks down at a certain rate. That once it's broken down to a certain rate, it'll like drop this anvil that breaks a thing of poison. And while the cat is in the box, you don't know if the cat has been poisoned or not. So the cat is simultaneously alive and dead. Theoretically, it exists in this duality of because you haven't opened the box to, again, it's like giving things meaning to make a determination until you open the box. It's both things. Because you just can't know until you give it that, well, it's dead, it's alive, it's whatever.
Yeah.
And no, I do. That's more of the concepts that I do really love exploring. Just that idea of, maybe I have done this before. Maybe, like you experience things like deja vu and think like, oh, I've done this. And maybe I have actually done this before. Or
Yeah.
for me, a thing that I've been experiencing a lot lately is, like kind of I call it the idea of like doppelgangers, but essentially seeing people where I'm like, I know you, I know your face. I have
Uh-huh.
no idea how I know you. There's no reason for me to know you. Like I ask about where like where you're from, and like there's no reason for me to know you, but I swear I know your face. Like, and
Yeah.
So, but it's okay. Well, maybe there's been other realities and other lives that I've lived, and I did know you and I do know your face, but my human ego mind is a brilliant perception filter in the way that it can compartmentalize. And so there's an answer that I can't quite get to. And, I guess at the end of the day, does the answer really matter, or does it matter that you're finally learning whatever it is, again, in the idea of reincarnation and kind of the video game aspect of doing it over and over again from the same checkpoint, right?
Yeah.
Have I gotten past the checkpoint that I'm supposed to get past yet?
Yeah. And I love that's why I really listen to Sam Harris too. He has a meditation app, but biggest thing with that, or biggest thing that I took away, especially just in the first few times I listened to it, was just regulating our thoughts. Essentially, you're trying to be thoughtless, trying to like not at least have them rule our daily lives so much that we can start to really sense and experience just what life is. But biggest thing was that, like, especially when it comes to our emotions, like, we can choose how long we want to be angry, and we can choose how long we want to feel regret, and we can choose how long we want to do each and every emotion. It's within our control. We choose to keep on manufacturing it for some reason or another. We get stuck. And how nice would it be just to be able to like just feel it just for the moment that you have to, and then and that's it.
Let it go.
And then go on. Yeah. It's just
right.
like it's not a, I don't know, it's not a crazy concept, but it's really hard to practice.
So no, but it's interesting. So like I'm a big fan of the two names that came into my head were Neville Goddard. Neville Goddard was a philosopher back in the 40s, 50s, 60s. The things that he would talk about were very much through the lens of the Bible, and the Bible as being not secular history, but as being a sort of instruction manual for how to operate this human existence, kind of, right? And so like his big thing, and a lot of the stuff you see on YouTube that's attached to him, or when people talk about him, is that imagining creates reality. If you imagine a scenario for yourself, you will create it in your reality. Which is such a fascinating thing for me. So it's like, okay, gotta keep imagining that I write full time and that's all I do, and that's what we gotta do. But then I'm also a big fan of Rhonda Byrne, Byrne, I think Byrne. I'm not sure. She's the one who wrote The Secret, and it filmed that documentary, The Secret, with all these different philosophical teachers. Again, the same concepts. Imagining creates reality, but also talking a lot about emotional states, and sort of the idea of remembering you are not the emotional state. You can feel it when it comes to whether it's anger, or depression, or sadness, or whatever, even if it's joy, whatever it is, you are not that state. You are in that state. It's a state of being, and you're just finding yourself in it.
Yeah.
And, we do get caught up in it as humans, and we identify ourselves with that state. I am angry, I am depressed, I'm anxious, I'm whatever. We very much identify ourselves with it, when all you really have to do is recognize that, like, this is a state of being that is separate of me. And if I want to let go of it, like I could pick up a pen and drop it, I can do that. And if I want to, like she talks about it as like getting on a horse. Like, you can get on the horse of anger, but you can get off it just as easily. You can say, I don't want to ride this anymore, I'm getting off. Like, you can't choose that. But it is something that we're not conditioned to believe that that's possible for us. And so it's, again, that kind of deprogramming. You have to unlearn that you've been taught that when you're in that emotion, that is who you are, and you identify with it, or it's something attached to you that you don't have control over. But when really no, you do have the option to shift yourself. It's not an easy thing to do because it's not practiced, right? We're not practiced in it, but it is absolutely possible, and you can do it, So that is definitely something for me that I've tried to, again, especially lately, just having the big vast dreams and the things that I really want to do with my reality. It's like, okay, I can focus my energy and my attention on the, how do I do it? I don't know how to do it. Or I can focus on, there's a lot of people that do it. I want to do it. It's possible. And I don't necessarily have to know how it'll happen. But if I just hold that vision, and if I hold that emotional state of what would it be like if it were true, that the right things will come into my experience, And it's, some of it is partly because you are in a state of mind where you're able to see them. Whereas if you are focused on the negation of what you want, well, that's what you're going to notice. But if you
Yeah.
focus on what would that reality look like, well, then you start to notice the things that speak to what that reality is. And the puzzle kind of comes together on its own in a more effortless way,
Yeah.
so, and
When
that's
I think
definitely, again, concepts like this are, I want to write those into what I write, because I think they're a little bit big and broad for maybe main swaths of society, and certainly, the conservative background we grew up in. And I think that if you can present it in the form of entertainment, that maybe those concepts are a little easier for people to swallow.
Yeah. When I think even of that same hope, goes hand in hand with either religion or whatever your kind of big picture idea is, where it's like regardless of whether it happens or not, that's not necessarily the sense of it. It's like, but is it better for me to hope that there's going to be something later or there's going to be something afterwards? Not that I'm discounting this life, because there's plenty of people that do that I don't agree with, where it's like, no, still enjoy this one, like still go for it, on this level while you can. The same thing, like as a writer, I mean, if I find out on my deathbed that I didn't become the writer that I thought I would be or that I should be, I would have rather spent that how many years hoping and waiting and like knowing that's going to come, waiting for it, like keep pushing for it,
Being in the
instead of
space
giving
of,
up now.
feeling good about it, instead of in a space of, yeah, hopeful is better than hopeless.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, I might as well. I mean, if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. Or if it doesn't happen in the way that I think it will happen, then it doesn't happen in the way that I think it will happen. But something will happen, and there's no reason not to be, that, I'm getting used to your positivity and not being not so toxic. So,
You got it. Well, you do. It's that idea that energy goes where attention flows. If you have your attention on the, it has to be available. I wouldn't want it if I couldn't have it.
right.
And look at how many people, there's so many people who are able to do it. And I'm not any different than them. I'm made up of the same consciousness stuff that they are. We all are made of the same atoms on the quantum level. And if I come from the same stuff that they come from, then I have to be able to create whatever version of that they have, that I look at and I say I would love to have that. And I think that's another big thing too, and something I've been doing a lot lately, is like when you see someone who has what you want, don't look at it with the sort of like the longing feeling, the
Mm-hmm.
jealousy or what, celebrate that. Good for you that you have that. And good for me that I am in a mindset where I can see that you have that, because that
Yeah.
means that I am in a place where, like, the universe or whatever you want to call it is showing me signs of, I call it signs of land, like when you're sailing and you see birds or sticks floating in the water and it's signs that land is coming. It's signs of land, right?
Yeah.
There's signs that what I want in my reality is absolutely possible, and that's the universe showing me, yes, you can have it, keep going.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like you said, it's so much better to be in that space, and whether it happens or comes about in the way that I think it does, that's kind of irrelevant. If you're
Right.
in the emotional state that feels better, isn't that what we're all looking for, is just to feel good? Don't
Yeah.
we all just want happiness? Isn't that
Yeah.
really what it's all about?
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of, I wanted to bring up before, just with the sci-fi stuff and alien civilizations or whatever. Have you seen Prometheus?
Yes, I have.
Like as
um
soon as I watched it, like that is such a cool, like especially for like a kind of a half sci-fi, scary, whatever thriller movie. Like it had a lot of good, just philosophical stuff, and I'm like, oh, this is
well,
enjoyable.
so I'm definitely, I do love, aliens, and the
Hmm.
life is out there, because how arrogant would we be to think that we're the only sentient beings that are,
Yeah.
in an infinitely expansive universe? Like, it's such a primitive idea, right? So that is something that I do really love to explore, and that's definitely, again, in the realm of all the different things that I kind of go through, the paranormal, esoteric, all those. Again, anything that I wasn't supposed to look at and and count as valid,
Mm.
according to the conditioning that I have for throughout my life. That is definitely a big concept that I really do love, and I'm, definitely kind of in that not necessarily UFO conspiracy world. I'm not one of those that looks at it in the way of Prometheus and I don't think that it's like, in my mind, if any kind of extraterrestrial species has the technology to travel interstellarly, then how could they possibly be violent? How could, like, that's such a human base. Like, that's our shit that we haven't gotten over as humanity. Like, how could we go out as a species out into the stars unless we got over that shit? Like, there's, I just, so that's for me one of those things that, like, alien movies in general anymore kind of, I'm like, I just don't think it would be that. I don't think they're coming here to eat us or turn us into cattle, because why would they? They wouldn't have to.
Well, and the cool thing about, at least what I thought was Prometheus, was that when they found the beings that created them, like in their own image, they were monsters. They were like evil things. And so just the idea that even if we were created by aliens or created by, whatever, something that we've like progressed past them in a better way, like just by the simple human experience that we've had to go through, that hopefully we've come out better than, maybe we think.
Than our origins, and again, isn't that the point of, continuing through the incarnation cycle, is to be better the next time than you were the last time, and to be more expansive, and to be in a space of more compassion, of less of the violence, less of the war, less of the sort of, fighting for resources like they're not renewable kind of thing. So that's definitely something that I also really love exploring in my writing. And some of the alien characters that I have, I'm really excited to again, thank you, universe, in advance for giving me more time to write, because I have these brilliant episodes that I would like to write.
Thanks for the millions and millions of people that are watching us right now.
And who are joining our Patreon, you wonderful, beautiful humans. We thank you so very much. It is so appreciated. But one of the things I wanted to do is to have an episode, or maybe multiple episodes, where there are alien versions of Abernathy that, like, well, this is a version of you that developed as a reptilian on whatever planet, I love that idea too, of like, well, there are other versions of you that aren't necessarily even human versions of you. There's versions of you that are aliens. And, that's something that I really love the idea of exploring too. So yes, thank you very much, everyone, for joining our Patreon, because we have so much awesome stuff to offer the world, and we're just so ready to do it.
Yeah, this is, we're on our, what number of podcasts are we on now? We're probably
we're only on number 3. But
this is our 3rd, but we're on our, you're coming back to this. We're actually on our 1,000th by the time you're listening to this. So it's been happening.
I love that. Yes. We're on episode 516, but thank you for coming all the way back to episode number 3. We appreciate you for going back through the catalog. Thank you. You get a gold star. I love it. Fantastic. Well, listen, you know what? I think you've done really well driving for this episode.
Yeah.
And isn't it great that at episode 516 we're both excellent drivers?
Yes.
Hooray for us. I love it. Well, thank you for exploring the sort of the more expansive ideas that I like, that again, I think I have some, like, unconditioning I need to do, and sort of being afraid to put them out there in terms of, like, people are going to think that I'm completely bonkers, and nope, you got to put it out there and do it anyway, because it is where my highest joy is at.
If the world's not too bonkers for Sean, then I think he'll be okay.
Right, there you go.
Yeah, Sean's got some awesome ideas. Like, just blow it up. Like, those are up.
Follow it, do it. Somebody out there is going to resonate with it and like it. There's an audience for all of us. There's too many people on the planet for there not to be.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for listening, and thank you, Shane, for this conversation. It's been great. Of course.
Yeah,
look forward to the next one.
Yeah, sounds good. See you next time.
Hi again, friends. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of No Small Stories. We're so glad that you could join us. If you yourself are a creator, an entrepreneur, or a small business person, we would definitely love to talk to you. What inspires you, and what is it that you do, and how can we connect you to this creative community? If you'd like to find us, you can follow us on Instagram, No Small Stories Podcast. And if you'd like to support more episodes, you can visit our Patreon, patreon.com/No Small Stories. You can also find the information in the links in the description for Shane's information and his website, as well as my website for my Abernathy Franklin adventures. Do leave a comment, share with your friends, like, subscribe, do all those things that listeners can do. We thank you so much for joining us. Until next time, remember, no matter how small you start, your story is always a big deal to us.